So welcome to the Plodcast. This is episode 100. We're moving from 2 digits into 3 digits. Episode 100. This is the Plodcast. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you. Great to have you here. I'm pretty sure that I've talked about this before, but I want to talk about it some more. I want to talk about it again, and that is the issue of boycotts. Okay, the issue of boycotts. We see that the secular left is going in big time for boycotts. They want companies to divest if they have any holdings that are connected to Israel, and they want to boycott Netflix and Disney. Both threatened to boycott Georgia, to not make movies there in Georgia because of the abortion law, the heartbeat abortion law that was just signed there. And a lot of Christians have gone in for this over the years and have said, well, we need to boycott this company because they're doing this evil thing or this vile thing. One of the website that's dedicated to knitters, Ravelry, just announced that they would not have any tolerance for Trump supporters on this knitting website. I mean, seriously, knitting? Because they were taking a stand against white supremacy, and I'm tempted to wonder why can't we have all our knitting websites tell us what our views ought to be on the Federal Reserve interest rate, or come on, everything has gotten so politicized, and then some Christians will say, well, should we boycott Ravelry, and this is the basic answer. No, we are not morally obligated to detach ourselves from morally problematic businesses. And this is something we find in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul tells us that when you're considering the eating of meat that was offered to idols, the thing that you should take into account, the thing that you should have in the front of your mind, is your relationship with your brother. You don't have to worry about the meat. The meat is not demon-possessed. So, for example, if today, let's say Burger King instituted a new practice where they had a little alcove in the back by the grill, and a little goddess, a little statue of a goddess in it, and the guy, whichever employee was back there grilling up the hamburgers, whenever he had a tray of hamburgers done, he would turn around, offer the tray up to the goddess, say a little prayer, and then shove the hamburgers out the little window. Now, if that were happening at McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's, if that were happening, thought experiment, would there be a controversy in the Christian church over whether or not it was lawful to eat at that establishment anymore? I mean, they're sacrificing these hamburgers to demons. They're saying a prayer over them to demons. And let's say they really are. We want to be careful because there are a lot of crazy rumors that go around the Christian world, and things are said, of corporations doing things for the devil, and they're not really. But in the Apostle Paul's time, the best meat was available in the shambles. When the animals were sacrificed to these various gods and goddesses, the temples would frequently turn around and sell the meat that had been offered up to their god or goddess. And Paul argues that it's perfectly lawful to buy meat there and eat that meat. He says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The meat is not demon-possessed. But, he goes on, if you are eating this meat that was offered to an idol yesterday afternoon, and you're eating it at your Christian potluck, Christian barbecue today, and you have a guy at your potluck, you have a guy at your barbecue who was just converted last week, and he was converted out of the worship of that particular goddess, and he cannot disassociate the eating of that meat from the worship of the goddess. And if he sees you, the stronger Christian, eating that meat, and he says, oh, must be all right to eat that meat, and so he eats the meat, and then he tumbles back into the idolatry. Paul says it would be better not to eat meat forever than to stumble your brother in that way. So what Paul's after is the relationship issue here. Paul emphatically teaches that the meat itself does not have cooties. Even though if let's say I bought that roast for $10 from an idol temple, that means my $10 goes into their coffers, and they're not going to do good and godly things with it. But Paul nowhere says that we have to separate ourselves economically from ungodly enterprises. So we don't need to worry about who owns Safeway, or if the Mormons own this hotel chain, or that really is a matter of indifference. What matters is whether you're stumbling your brother or not. Okay, so if now that with that said, a boycott can be lawfully pursued if it's pursued as a tactic, which is different than pursuing a boycott as a moral necessity. A tactic is simply something that you're doing to try to improve things in your little corner. A moral necessity, it doesn't matter if it works or not. You just have to say, I'm not going to do it. It's sort of like Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to eat the king's food, and that was a moral necessity, and it didn't matter how stupid they looked. It just didn't matter. They weren't going to do it. So, if I lived in a small town, and let's say the local gas station in that town started carrying pornography, started selling pornography, and the town had 50 people in it. We didn't want the kids in the town having easy access to pornography, and someone organized a boycott. Shoot, let's say that I organized the boycott. And I was telling, Billy Bob here that we're just going to buy our gas down the road, 5 miles down the road, until you quit infusing porn into our little town. This is simply a tactic. It's pressuring someone who you're living close to in order to get him to do something that is beneficial, that you consider to be beneficial. Now, let's say I've organized this boycott, but I have to drive over to Seattle in the middle of the boycott. Is it a sin or inconsistent for me to buy gas at a gas station over there that sells porn from behind the counter? Well, I might have a hard time finding a gas station over there that doesn't, right? It's no inconsistency. The issue is not the gas. The gas doesn't have cooties. The gas is not demon-possessed. The issue is relationship and what you're doing, what you're accomplishing. So, boycott for Christians, boycotts are good. Boycotts are good if we think of them tactically and we deploy them somewhat rarely and in all wisdom. Okay? We don't have to partake in boycotts for the sake of moral cleanliness, with the exception of an activity that is itself sinful. So this is what's behind the bakers and the videographers and the photographers and the florists who are refusing to glorify same-sex weddings. What they're doing is they're saying they're applying this principle just as I've described it. If a homosexual comes into your bakery and he wants to buy a birthday cake, you say absolutely, and you sell him a birthday cake, because it's not a sin for a homosexual to have a birthday. If he wants a wedding cake, you can't use your skills to try to glorify an event that ought not to be glorified.
Always will be God.
So we are working our way through Plodcast episode 100, triple-digit Plodcast. and we are continuing our series of hamartiology, and the word apate, A-P-A-T-E, refers to deceit and deceitfulness. So one of the remarkable things about Scripture's use of this word is that the majority use concerns the deceitfulness of sin and not deceitfulness as sin. Deceitfulness as sin is you telling lies. The deceitfulness of sin is sin lying to you. There is, of course, Christ's reference to the deceitfulness of riches in his parable. He also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, there it is, choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. That's Matthew 13:22 and Mark 4:19. And then in Hebrews we read this, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. That's Hebrews 3:13. Sin lies. Sin is a deceiver. Paul explains to us that our lusts are deceitful and not just wrong. So our lusts are wrong and our lusts lie to us. That ye put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. So the corruption that we experience when we give way to lust is a corruption that we were assured would not happen. This corruption is something we were told it wouldn't go this way. These lusts are deceitful. And the Apostle Paul lumps vain deceit in with the pursuit of philosophy. He says, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, again, there it is, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. So unrighteousness generally is the same way. 2 Thessalonians 2:10, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. So that's deceivableness, deceitfulness of unrighteousness. And then 2 Peter 2:11, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they that count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Spots they are and blemishes, sporting themselves with their own deceivings, while they feast with you. 2 Peter 2:13. When people give way to this kind of dissipation, they are not rebelling, I should say they are not just rebelling. Of course they're rebelling, but they're not just rebelling. They are also telling themselves lies the entire time. So a man who starts committing adultery is lying to himself about what the end game is. Someone who is giving way to bitterness is lying to himself or to herself the entire time about what the end result of all this is. What will the harvest be? How can I plow and plant these seeds and expect a good harvest? How can I do that? Well, the answer is we cannot. So my book review this time, episode 100 of the Plodcast, my book review is the most recent book by C.R. Wiley, and the book is called The Household and the War for the Cosmos. The Household and the War for the Cosmos. Now, this is a unique book. It's not a monster book. It's a fairly small book, but it was a unique experience reading it because as Wiley works through the book, he's building the entire book is a sustained argument, and you realize as you get near the end that he's coming to the conclusion of the book, and of course, if you're coming near the end of the book, he's coming to the conclusion of the book, but he's coming to the crescendo of an argument. And the title of the book is The Household and the War for the Cosmos. What he is, what Wiley in effect does is he shows that the household codes, and I'll take probably the best example of this would be from the book of Ephesians, the famous chapter in Ephesians 5. So, and then it runs over into chapter 6, where it's talking about, in chapter 5, it's talking about husbands and wives. In chapter 6, he's talking about children and servants and household codes. What Wiley does is he shows that these household codes are not a postscript. They're not an, I'm finishing up this book on spiritual warfare in the heavenly places. I'm finishing up this book on how we're seated with Christ in the heavenly realms. But let me throw some practical stuff in that has nothing to do with anything. You should live this way because, after all, we're in the Greco-Roman culture, and we have to pay attention to these sorts of things so we don't offend the neighbors. No, what Wiley shows is that the way God wants us living in our households is a key part of his battle plan. It's a key part of how Christians ought to be comporting themselves so that we will have the impact in this world that we ought to have as we conduct our spiritual warfare. So we're not supposed to put these things in different jars and store them in different pantries. What Paul is doing through the book of Ephesians is showing that the household code, the way he wants Christians to live, the way he wants a husband to relate to a wife, the way he wants a wife to relate to her husband, the way he wants parents to relate to their children. This is key to how the gospel is going to go out into the world and transform it.
God don't never change. He's God.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.